Perceptions can be very powerful things. When I bought this lens in 2006, it cost me over $1,000. The construction quality was extremely good, and at the time I regarded it as being optical perfection. When I bought this lens in 2017, it was less than $200. The construction was quite low quality, and initially I was getting very poor image quality. The image quality problem was my own fault. If you just leave the camera in program mode on auto ISO, it selects a very high shutter speed because it's a telephoto lens. That results in a very high ISO value, and that results in a loss of detail. But the lens has an excellent image stabilization system, and if you select a lower shutter speed and a lower ISO, you get a lot better image quality. When I tested these two lenses individually recently, my perceptions were turned upside down. This lens wasn't nearly as good as my memories told me and quite disappointed me, whereas this lens was far better than I thought initially and really impressed me. I thought it was time I compared the two lenses head to head, and that's what I'll be doing in this video. Although both lenses have roughly the same focal length, we're not comparing apples with apples. There are big differences in price and size and weight. The reason for me moving to an EOS-M system was because I wanted to reduce the size and weight of the equipment I carried around. There's a 1 1/3 stop difference in maximum aperture at 200mm, and bearing in mind that each f-stop is equivalent to a halving or doubling of light, that's a big difference. The 70-200 is an L lens, which means that it has some weather sealing. It's more resistant to dust and water, and it's more resistant to bumps and knocks in the field. The autofocus systems are different. USM is faster and snappier, but STM is quieter and therefore better for video. If you want, you can add teleconverters to the 70-200. You can turn it into a 280mm f5.6 or a 400mm f8. You can't do that with the 55-200. Using adapters, you can use the 70-200 on all Canon systems. You can use it on EOS, both full frame and APS-C, EOS-R and EOS-M. The EF-M lens can only be used on EOS-M systems. First, let's look at the difference in focal length at the wide end, and this is the 70-200 at 70mm. This is the 55-200 at 55mm, and as you can see, the extra width at the wide end is quite nice. This is the 55-200 at a focal length of 200mm, and this is the 70-200 at 200mm, and as you can see, they're about the same. That may sound like an obvious statement, but I've read reports about 400mm on a 100-400 zoom lens being different to a prime 400mm lens, so there can be small differences. And what you should also notice comparing these two lenses is that there's very little difference in colour, contrast and sharpness. Now let's look at image stabilisation, and this is the 70-200 handheld at 1/30th of a second, and it's okay but not fantastic. When we reduce the shutter speed to a 15th of a second on the 70-200, the images start to look very blurred. This isn't the case with the 55-200, where I can still get very sharp images hand holding at a 15th of a second. This is quite surprising because the IS on the 70-200 is rated at 4 stops, whereas the 55-200 it's only rated as 3.5 stops. So it should be better on the 70-200, but in the real world that's not what I find. I don't believe there's a problem with the IS on my 70-200. I think the reason is because the 55-200 is so much smaller and lighter, it's a lot easier to hold steadily. Here's another example. This is the 70-200 handheld at a 30th of a second, and it doesn't look too bad. However, when we reduce the shutter speed to a 15th of a second, it looks very, very blurred, and this image is unusable. And this shot was taken at a very optimistic 1/8 of a second, and as you can see, it's very blurred and unusable. Now let's compare it with the EF-M 55-200. This shot is at a 30th of a second and it's very clear. When we went down to a 15th of a second with the 70-200, the shot became very blurred and was unusable. However, with the 55-200, it still looks pretty good and this image is still very usable. This is now taking it to extremes, but even at an eighth of a second, the image is still quite usable. The image stabilization system on the EF-M 55-200 is really excellent. Now let's take a look at the difference in maximum aperture, and this shot was taken with the EF-M 55-200 at 200mm at the maximum aperture of f6.3. And there are two things to notice. Firstly, the shutter speed is quite slow, it's only 100th of a second. And secondly, there's not really any bokeh effect. Ideally, the background should be quite blurred, but in this shot, you see that there's still quite a lot of detail in the background, and that's not really what you want. This is the same scene taken with the 70-200 at its maximum aperture of f4, and you'll see that the shutter speed is a lot faster, it's at 250th of a second. And with this one, there's not a great deal of blurring in the background, but at least you can see the bokeh effect. When your subject is closer, it increases the bokeh effect, and in this shot with the 55-200, we can see the bokeh quality at the maximum aperture. Here's the same thing with the 70-200, and I've selected an aperture of f6.3 so that we can make a direct comparison between the two lenses. And to my eye, the bokeh quality is better with the 70-200 lens compared to the 55-200. Now let's look at fine detail and resolving power. And this is a 100% crop taken with the EF-M 55-200. This is the same thing with the 70-200. And although the two images are quite similar, if you look closely, you can just see a bit more detail in the fake feathers. So for fine detail and resolution, I think the 70-200 just has the edge. Having carried out this test, this is my list of winners in various categories. My experience with the EF-M 55-200 is strange. Even before I got it, I believed it was a poor quality lens. And after I bought it, I continued thinking that way. And it wasn't until I started doing some objective testing that I realised what a great little lens it was. And considering how cheap it was, it really offers remarkable value for money. I haven't used my EF 70-200 since I moved to an EOS-M system, and there's still no reason to use it. The only reason I'm hanging on to my old EF lenses is that if I go to an EOS-R system in the future, I'll be able to use those lenses with an adapter and I won't have to spend a lot of money buying RF lenses. However, if you're just an EOS-M user, I think there's a clear winner in this test, and that's the EF-M 55-200. I hope that's been useful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And if it has been useful, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching.